Hello and welcome to Women of Wayland podcast. This is your host Yamini. This season, we are talking about courage, but the steady, civic kind. The kind that shows up to the meetings, the kind that reads the documents, the kind that raises a hand and says, I will run. And today's episode is special. I'm not hosting the conversation you're about to hear. Instead, we are bringing you a powerful community dialogue organized by the League of Women Voters of Wayland and Wayland Public Library. An honest, unscripted discussion about what it truly means to step into local governance. We'll hear from Wayland School Committee, the Wayland Select Board, and the Wayland Planning Board. They speak openly about why they chose to run, how it impacts their families and careers, what surprised them, what challenged them, and why they believe participation matters now more than ever. This conversation aligns deeply with our season's theme. At Women of Wayland, we are exploring how more women and more diverse voices can move from the sideline into decision making spaces. And this recording pulls back the curtain. You'll hear about the real weight of volunteer life balance, what contested races actually feel like, why thick skin matters, why governance is deeply personal but doesn't have to be partisan, and why showing up is more powerful than complaining. If you've ever thought maybe someday, this conversation might bring that someday a little closer. Let's dive in.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the League of Women Voters, Wayland's Run For It, the town office experience. I'm Sue Flicop, a member of the League of Women Voters of Wayland. Tonight, we're going to talk about how to make the decision to run for office. And we're going to talk with current elected officials, people who have made that choice, to talk about how they made the decision to run, how it affected their lives, and their thoughts on being an elected official. So this is the first half of a two-part event. The second part will be on Wednesday, January 7th, with Judy Reed, who's the town clerk, and another panel of former and current candidates or elected officials. We'll be talking about the mechanics of running for office, including getting nomination papers, how you get signatures, how to campaign if you have an opponent, things like that. So look for info on the library website and the League of Women Voters website. So a huge thanks to the Wayland Free Public Library in Portland Michael for sponsoring this program and managing the technology for today's event. And the League is so appreciative of their support for this program. A huge thanks as well to Mary Antes for her help and support in organizing the program. Just to set the stage for our discussion, in Wayland, there have been 2 years of uncontested races for open seats. So there has not been a choice for Wayland voters in the last 2 years. And just to note that the next election will be on April 2026. So we want to encourage people to run so that voters have a choice between different visions, perhaps values or ideas for our community. But we also don't want to sugarcoat things so that people have a realistic idea of what it's like to be an elected official. So with all this in mind, I want to introduce our panel tonight. These are all very busy elected officials who serve on 3 incredibly important boards. We have Erin Gibbons here, chair of the Wayland School Committee, serving her second term. And prior to that, you were active on school councils and the PTO. I checked everyone out on Google. And we have Doug Levine, who is the chair of the vice chair of the Wayland Select Board, serving his second term. And you were a former member of a whole lot of other boards, including the Zoning Board of Appeals. And then we have Annette Lewis from the Wayland Planning Board, she was a former chair of the Planning Board and a veteran of many boards and committees, including the Board of Road Commissioners. So I want to thank you all so much for being here tonight and for being willing to share your thoughts and your experiences. We will be taking questions if there are any from the audience or any online, but please, I thought we'd start out first asking the 3 of you how you came to the decision to run for office. Like, do you have little stories to tell or, thought process that you went through?
Hi. I always kind of wanted to be involved in town politics and just kind of giving back and being able to serve the community more so than the politicking of it. And I kind of thought that school committee would be a good way. I have 4 daughters that are all in the Wayland school system. One just graduated. So that seems like a good place to start. And little did I know that it's one of the most important and busy boards in town. So that's really it. It just sort of fell in my lap, and I still blame Doug.
So I come from a family of very introverted people, and I grew up next door in Weston, and my parents were not involved in community government at all. And I didn't know there was a town meeting or that there were boards and committees on which you could serve. And so my parents don't know where I came from. They say I'm not adopted. From a young age, I've been very involved in the community, starting in middle school, got involved in student government up through college and law school. Went to Kennedy School of Government. So I always was serving in some capacity in student government. And as soon as I moved to Wayland about 12 years ago, I got involved in the Economic Development Committee. I connected with longtime public servant Tom Fay and former select board member Cherry Carlson about what it was like to serve in various boards. They suggested that that's where a good place to start to learn about how local government works, kind of from that angle in. And from there, I ran for select board in 2017 and served for over 3 years. I came off during COVID when we had an extended term then because we didn't have town meeting for an extra 6 months that year. And have served on multiple other boards, as you mentioned, the ZBA, Wastewater Management Cable Advisory Committee. I've really gotten to know various aspects of our town government and then wanted to come back on the board. Now been for about a year and a half. And it's a great way to connect with people you may not otherwise connect with in town. Meet a lot of folks who work for the town and obviously a lot of folks who volunteer for the town. So a great way to plug into the community.
I've been in town for 46 years. I've run in 8 elections and I lost my first one. It was in the 90s and I ran for planning board because I was very concerned that we weren't doing future planning. And I thought that we needed to have a real program. I lost, gave up for a while. Then I was appointed to be a road commissioner, which was the predecessor of the DPW. I then was elected, I think 4 times after that on the road commission. And then I was an associate member of the planning board more recently. And someone asked me if I would do it because I have a legal background and it would be helpful. So I did that. And then one of the full members decided he wasn't running. And then I took his place. I think it's important in running that you do run and not think about if you're going to win or what happens if you lose. Certainly you want to win, but even just the act of pulling papers, meeting people, getting signatures, learning what's going on in the town is really helpful just to be part of the community. In Wayland, everything is truly a democracy. We run the town, all of us. The involvement that you have helps to build the community that you deserve. If you're not involved, you're not going to get the kind of community that you think you're going to get.
Well, thank you all for making this decision. I'm just wondering, if I were thinking about running for office, I'd be wondering how it affects the rest of your life, your family, work, any other commitments you might have at that moment. And I'm just wondering if you have some thoughts you want to share with people, hopefully not to be afraid of it, but just to be prepared and, make plans. You want to go for that?
Most of the elected boards are 3-year terms. The planning board is 5 years. So when you pick out papers to the planning board, you should plan on staying for the full 5 years because there are projects that go over several years. And if you're an organized individual, you can fit everything in. If you're not an organized individual, then it becomes overwhelming. And for planning board, and even when I was a road commissioner, you have to be able to read plans, understand them, read the reports that come from our peer reviewers who are looking at the technical documents, and be able to interact with the public at meetings. Our hearings are public hearings, and sometimes people become aggressive, and the board tries to control that, and people get heated, and we understand all of that, but we try to respond to their concerns and make sure that the applicant addresses the concerns of the public. Is there anything more?
I would say I learned, or maybe I coined a new term in my own mind, which is aside from work-life balance, there's volunteer life balance, because serving on certain boards like planning board, finance committee, school committee, and select board can be a lot. And it's not just attending the board meetings, it's what you're doing in between that time when you're connecting with constituents or you're meeting with town staff or the school staff. And it can be a significant pull on your time. And so to Annette's point, it is critical to be organized. It is difficult with younger kids because oftentimes, especially if you're working during the day, you're having to do this other work at night or first thing in the morning or on the weekends, which is when kids have activities as well. So there is that volunteer life tension / balance, and you really need the support. If you have a spouse, they need to be on board with you running for a board, because it's not, you're being pulled away with your family obligations a lot.
So I think being on a board can be as heavy or as kind of light as you make it. And there's a lot expected of every board, but there are different boards that you can be a part of that might not be as demanding as others, right? There are some that may only meet, 4 times a year or or once a month. So that's important to look at if you're just kind of trying to stick your toe into it and see if maybe it's something you want to do. There's different positions you could look at that are, less demanding. Another thing that I would say is I have a problem with saying no. Thank you, Doug. And so I've really had to work on trying to create boundaries for myself and, really building out, again, organization around, okay, I'm not going to take calls for school committee on Saturdays or Sundays, which then leaves me with my work and my kids and school committee during the week. But you kind of just have to build those rules for yourself and stick to them. And that's been something that's been really helpful for me. Also, having a supportive spouse, if you do have kids, trying to get them to understand the value in what you're doing. Because it is hard to say, no, I'm not going to be home at bedtime because we have a meeting.
And that you mentioned that you lost your first race. So I'm just wondering, sort of, like, do you have any strong feelings about that? I mean, it must have been hard. Like, how did you prepare yourself to run against an opponent? And perhaps you also had contested races, but I'm just wondering, like, if you, hopefully we will have some contested races in our future in Wayland, and people will have a choice. And I'm just wondering how people can prepare for that.
I took out papers first and I didn't think about it. I mean, I knew what I wanted to accomplish. And even just speaking at the League of Women Voters before the election, talking to voters at the landfill, telling them what my ideas were very helpful. And some of those ideas, even though I wasn't elected, have now come to fruition. So you're sort of building a foundation that people will follow. And I guess I never worry about competition in anything. It's just not important. What's important is what I want to accomplish. And I think that that's what people need to think about. If people don't participate and all they do, it's not bad, but all they do is come to hearings and complain, that's not fair. It's not fair to the elected officials, and it's not fair to the rest of the community because they're not participating. They're saying what the problem is, but they're not helping to fix the problem. And this is a small community, and we need everybody to work together to fix the problem. We need long-term planning for years. I mean, we need to be planning for 20 years in advance, and we need to know what projects are planned to come up in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, so that we can gauge how much the taxes are going to be and be able to afford the things that most people want. We just can't have everything instantaneously. So, I mean, that's always I'm thinking about, even when on the planning board, I'm thinking about that long term for the rest of the town.
So my first race was contested in 2017. There were 3 of us running for 2 seats. I would say one thing that's very nice in this small community is these seats are all nonpartisan. Folks are not running with a political party. And so my experience has been being involved in that first campaign and then assisting in other campaigns that it's it's very issue focused. And I'm thankful for that because they may be your opponent, but they're also your neighbor because we're a relatively small town.
Like saying things don't get personal, in other words.
I've seen some personal shots, for example, on the Facebook community forum, where it's easier to take a personal shot. But in my experience, like at the League of Women Voters debates, and I've seen a number of them now, I wouldn't say things got very personal there, for example.
That's a no-no.
Maybe years ago. Yeah. I missed it. I would also say that I appreciate when people step up to run. And so to your point in the beginning, I think it's a good thing when we have a contested race because it forces people to share what their vision and their ideas. You know, it's like in state or federal elections, when you have a contested primary, that's a helpful thing for voters because you're hearing what that campaign and that candidacy is all about. So I do hope that happens again in the future and we break this 2 years streak.
Unfortunately, fortunately I did, it was a contested race when I ran for my first seat. And unfortunately it did get a little bit personal and I did my best to stay above it and keep it issue focused and stay kind of like clean and keep my hands clean. And I felt that was the best way to go. I think when push comes to shove, we're all working toward the common goal and the greater good of getting the community to where we want it to be. So my suggestion would be, keep it focused, keep it point, I guess, and that, you may need to be prepared for something. But in the end, it was worth it and it worked out. So, and then last time I didn't really run because there was no one against me.
So you all re-upped at some point, and sometimes more than once for an elected office. So what is it you like most? Like if you were leaving a sales pitch for your board or just in general, what would you tell people?
From the select board perspective, I would tell people it's actually a very interesting position because we deal with so many different issues in a calendar year or in a cycle. Having served as vice chair on 2 different boards with different groups, that creates a unique dynamic, just serving with different folks. But the issues are always different, what this town is facing. And there are folks like Annette mentioned who do come and complain and we consider it comes with the territory. But there are also people who are very grateful that other folks are stepping up. And so I hear that enough from folks that they're appreciative that because we have over 40 boards and committees in this town. So we need a lot of people to be serving. We have a fantastic staff. It's not a massive staff, at least on the town side. And so we very much need people to be serving. And on that sheet, the handout, we have a number of boards that need folks. So it's hard because the select board appoints a number of people and we're constantly having to recruit. So the more we can get the word out there, the better.
Just to let the audience know, we have a sheet actually on the league website, and there's one here of the open seats that will be up for election in April. But also we're compiling a list of boards and committees, and it's like a moving target. With how many seats are open. It seems like if you have a passion for something in the town, then there's probably a place for you on a board.
At the federal level, we can have very little input. At the state level, we don't get much input either. But at the local level, we can have a lot of input. And being on a board, you can help shape the way the town looks, functions, what your taxes are going to be, and learn about the entire community and meet lots of different people that make you feel like a part of the community. And that's what I liked about it.
One of the things that I've liked the most about serving so far has been that I'm from a perspective of trying to serve the whole community. I'm forced to look through different lenses and see things with a lot of different perspectives, from listening to community members and then also sitting around a table and hearing how my committee members might feel on an issue has really opened my eyes to how many different opinions there can be and that there is a way to compromise, even if those opinions are really different. And then the other thing that is just getting to know from the school committee specifically, really getting to know the inner workings of the school system in the district, which has helped me a lot to better understand what my kids are doing day in, day out. And I love having at least somewhat of a say and insight into all of that.
So do people come up and approach you in the supermarket or the street? And is that a good thing or a bad thing? A combination?
Yeah, there are times when you know I don't have time to talk and you can just do something quickly and say, sorry, come to public comment and we'll talk to you then. But sometimes it's a good thing when people tell you what they think. I can't, because I'm on an adjudicatory board, I can't say, oh, yes, I agree with you, or this is what I think. But listening to what they have to say is good. And I always tell them to put it in writing or say it at a meeting so that every other board member hears it as well.
I actually think you've done that to me. You said that to me.
I find it's helpful because it's a way to take the pulse of the town on certain issues. And so I get there through various mediums. People will email to my select board email or my personal email, or they'll catch me in person. Both my daughters play soccer, among other sports. So on the sidelines, I'm often talking shop about town, missing what's going on in the field. But I find that pretty helpful to get that feedback.
One of the things that I always say to my own committee members is I've never turned down anyone in the public asking me to meet. So I will carve out time for people. It's not always easy to do it on the fly. If you run into someone at Starbucks, it's difficult sometimes to be in the seat where you're sitting at the table and we have public comment, but it's not a two-way conversation. And so it's nice to be able to connect with someone outside of the meeting and have a real conversation.
I was just thinking that you've all been in leadership roles, actually, on boards. And I'm just wondering if that is something, I mean, did you choose that? And what's the difference between being like a member of one of these boards and actually being a leader? Like, do you get help, support, or are you really, becomes like a second job for you?
So I did not choose it. I was sort of thrust into it, just based on dynamics of my board or my committee. Again, when I said it is what you make it, when you take a board seat, it really is what you make it. And it depends on what the rest of your committee puts in. And so it also ebbs and flows. One of the things that has really changed from a dynamic standpoint with the school committee is that there's now 5 working moms on the committee. And it hasn't always been that way. And I think that's kind of newer to this board. And so it's really hard to, everybody wants to be able to pitch in, but there's competing priorities. So the leadership roles are beneficial because I think you learn a lot and you're kind of just thrown in to figure it out. But that's what.
From a select board perspective, I've served under 4 different chairs in my 2 terms. And I would say the chair of that board specifically is significantly more responsibility than even the vice chair and certainly the other 3 members. They're really the go-to person for the town manager, obviously, but also the town manager's office and other staff. And they're the lead single point of contact. So necessarily that comes with much greater responsibility. And I think that talking about that volunteer life balance, that takes it up a notch. And I served as a vice chair in my first term on the board, and I'm vice chair now, so I can witness it somewhat up close. And I have a lot of respect for people who serve in the chair position because they're giving that much more of themselves than we're already giving a lot.
I did not choose to be chair of the planning board. I had been the chair for 3 years there. When I was on the road commission, it was fun. We rotated. And when I was vice chair, I helped the chair. And when I was chair, the vice chair helped me. And it worked out very well. but the lift wasn't as heavy as it is in the planning board. So as chair, it's definitely a lot more. And there's a lot of planning and organizing. And even though we have a staff person, I need to figure out when we're going to have hearings ahead of time so that I know that we're going to finish in a timely manner. I need to know when the engineers are going to have materials ready. If I want to coordinate with another board, say conservation, on stormwater issues, I have to work with them. So it's a lot of planning and logistics. But what I've started doing is assigning tasks to my board members because some people weren't volunteering and it was just too much. So somebody's supposed to be looking at minutes now. We have somebody who takes minutes, a paid person, but then will have to be gone over before it goes to the rest of the board. I have somebody who's picked up the accessory dwelling unit issue. I have somebody who's picked up solar energy. And without that, we just couldn't possibly manage. So everybody has to be able to pick up something. Coming and being on a board just to be on a board, to say you are, it's not a good thing to do. It puts too much pressure on everybody else.
That sounds reasonable, but just be aware, all the people out there who are thinking of joining, who would like to run for the planning board. You're going to have a job. Yes. So, and it was probably a question you expected, but what have you liked least? Like, what would you change if you could about being an elected official? Just, I would hate for someone to choose to run. You said you ran and you didn't realize how much work it would be. And so I do think it's fair to try and give people a realistic, or as much as we want to say realistic picture of what they'd be in for. Because I think then you can organize your life and maybe do a better job and volunteer for pick up some of the work that someone else might do. So what would you tell people to just be aware of that, you found surprising perhaps?
It may be a good idea if you've never done public service before to start with something that isn't as overwhelming as potentially the school committee. People look at me and they're, really? You didn't think that was going to be a lot of work? I'm like, I don't know. I just think it was going to be like this. But so that was just a little bit of like a shock. And so now I'm able on my 4th year to better balance. I think something else that is a little bit frustrating, coming from like corporate world into, and this might, I think municipal government in general moves slower. So that can be frustrating. And I would say the third thing that I knew about having it be implemented in practice, it can also be frustrating, is the open meeting law. And so complying with that and making sure that you're friends with George instead of not. But yeah, so those would say like the 3 things that are kind of good to think about.
I'd say another one to add to those, and we had mentioned this in passing, but I think it's important to be able to have a thick skin because people complain, and while it may be focused on the issue and may not be personal, people can get very agitated. And these are local issues that affect people directly. I'm thinking of an example, the first time I served on the board, and we had to come up with a uniform policy of what private ways we were going to plow or not, which necessarily meant we weren't going to plow them all. And some that had been plowed were no longer going to be plowed. And people were justifiably very, very worked up about that. And we had a couple of hearings, and the chair did a great job that evening of controlling the room, so to speak. But I think it's important you're in a volunteer position and to know that these are issues that will touch people directly, and it's not going to always be the way that they want them to go. And so you'll hear people direct.
I don't know. It's been a very long time. I don't mind the open meeting law problem at all. Never have. I think it's quite easy to follow the rules. And I think that we all should be following the rules. There's conflict of interest law. I don't find that difficult either. I agree with Doug that there are times when people get heated and it's a little difficult. But again, I practiced law for 52 years and done a lot of public hearings on projects. Sort of just rolls off your back after a while.
Well, actually, I should just make sure there are no questions out there. We do have a question. Great.
Okay. If you're not ready for a major board, what other options do you suggest?
So the question is, if you're not ready for a major board, what other options would you suggest?
There are several, I would say, but one that is recommended by a number of folks who've served on different boards as a good starting place. And a number of folks have started on this board to learn about the lay of the land, which is, I would say, less of a lift than other boards, is the Economic Development Committee, which traditionally meets one morning a month, usually a Friday morning for an hour and a half or 2 hours or so, as the same chair since the board was founded a number of years ago. So a person who has a lot of institutional knowledge and a lot, obviously, continuity from the beginning. And I would say, as an example, that's a good place to start.
And that's an appointed.
Appointed by the select board.
Right, so.
Are we saying running?
Well, I think you could give an example of both. I think if someone is just looking to get engaged and to start out to meet people, so are there any elected positions you think might be a good place to start, like actually being a candidate?
Yeah, the trust funds. They have particular trust funds that they oversee and the financial implications of those. And that helps if eventually you want to go to finance committee, which is an appointed board. You get enough of a background so that you understand municipal finance a little bit. And also the Board of Health, I'd say it's sort of in between. They look at septic systems, they look at the school nursing, they look at what is it that it's called the mental health kinds of things. And that gets a wide swath of people who come in before them.
As long as there's not a.
And the Board of Library Trustees, which is a level position because they oversee the library.
And you have a question? Sure.
Oh, my name is Yami, and I have served on Wayland Human Rights for a while. I resigned in 2023, and I realized I was overwhelmed. I was a family member and the chair, and as a woman, I found challenges with the family life and work balance. It was overwhelming because, like Evan said, it's very hard to say no to people. And when you get into it, you enjoy the feeling of serving the public, good feeling of solving problems. And that gives you a hope and purpose to life. What my podcast season is right now exploring is getting women into the local governance more and more and more. Now, my question to you, the first question is, how do you think women's perspective change in local decisions? What is your take on it?
I think women are much more thoughtful.
I think you might get in trouble for that comment.
I think that women bring, and I'll probably get in trouble for this too, but more of a holistic approach to the way that they might look at solving a problem. And there is both a beauty to that. And sometimes, that can also be a little bit of an issue, but I do think more holistic and more thoughtful, and not as impulsive. So I think those are pluses.
It's a professional for 52 years that started off in a male-dominated environment. I don't think there's a difference between men and women. I think that if you're a professional and you pay attention to the issues, it's the same thing. And if you're on a board and you're a member or the chair, you need to make sure that everybody speaks and you hear from everybody. And what I found particularly on the road commission was, as we did that and everybody spoke and the chair didn't say, I think this first, but you went all around. By the time we were done, we had a consensus. We all agreed. So when I was on the road commission, at times I was just one woman, at times I was two women, and it was a 5-member board. And again, it's all on the individual.
So I've been in the professional world for about half the time, but still about 25 years, so a fair amount of time, and have worked for both male and female bosses, and obviously male and female colleagues. And I find what's most important is to have a balance of both, because I think it's really critical to have the perspective from both sexes. And I found that when that happens, I feel like we come up with so much more substance and are much more effective at addressing. Mostly worked for government, federal and state government, at addressing these various public problems.
A follow-up question on that is, Wayland is a very small town, 13,000, 14,000 population. The diversity you will see in Wayland is amazing. Surprisingly, there are people from all over the world. And I have interviewed people from all over the world. So my question is, when we are talking about bringing women into the local governance, especially of the young families, because this is a school district, we want people to be participating in making decisions. How do you think we can facilitate a smoother transition from home to local governance, for women, for men?
I think one way to do it, it's difficult, but you have to get some critical mass, some group to serve, and then to be that example. And then, so, we have the Wayland Community Children's and Parents Association and the Wayland Dads. And once in a while, they do like a Wayland 101 with board members who have younger kids in the school system, so they can speak directly because they understand the volunteer life balance and can speak to people's concerns. But it's getting that critical message. It's challenging, but we are always trying to do that.
How do we inform people from different communities to come run for elections? How do we do this?
Several years ago, my husband was running for select board, and he met with the Asian American group through the diversity committee and did a presentation on what government is, why people run, what the positions were that were open. And he had something out on the table tonight about just how our government functions. I think if there are individual groups like that, it's important to go out and meet them where they are to try and convince them that they're certainly welcome.
One last thing. Okay, I'm running out of time. Governance and politics. How different are they here in the local level?
Politics, like national politics, is that what you're saying? Or just the political aspect? I feel like politics bleeds into so much of what we do in various aspects of our life. Like politics can just be about advocacy sometimes. Whenever we have town meeting and we talk about what are the controversial articles, which are usually some of the bigger projects or a zoning change. I think politics necessarily plays in because you have people on both sides of the issue. I would say with a few exceptions, by and large, and I'm setting aside the Facebook Wayland Community Forum, by and large, it's respectful and above board. And we really, and I think we have a moderator right now at town meeting who does a great job of controlling the room and keeping it issue focused. But yes, that I think they necessarily mix. That to be expected.
It depends on the board. For the zoning board, for example, which is an appointed board, and the planning board, which is an elected board, we don't really deal with politics. We deal with rules, regulations, and state statute. If we got into politics as a chair, I would stop it because it's not appropriate. Everything should be totally above board on an even plane.
As an elected official, like I'm sure when you chose to run, you were focused on the job, right? You want to do the job. But I'm sure this politics does enter into the picture, whether you like it or not, right? Maybe even in the planning board, people must come up to you and want to talk to you about, I think this would be good for the town, and I think that would be bad for the town.
Right. Politics, that's our job. If we need zoning changes, it's good to hear about them. We can decide as a planning board whether we think what's being proposed makes sense. And oftentimes we don't think it makes sense. At town meeting, you can see we do a report on all proposed zoning articles. And sometimes we say we don't think that it's appropriate. So it's up to the town to decide.
So you see these as feedback from the community.
Yeah. I personally don't think politics should ever enter into it. I see it happening. And there are times when I think it's wholly inappropriate. I think that we're there to serve the entire community and even people we may not agree with. And there have been times over the years where I've voted against my own best interest because it wasn't in the best interest of the community. And that's the job.
Yeah, one more question. It sort of goes off of Yamini's. Just wondering the question is, what can we do to make serving on a board more attractive to busy people? But just to expand on that, have you seen anything happen towards that effort, or do you have ideas of how things can change, or does the town manager help with that? What's happening there?
one of the things that I think has helped, I know some of the boards have gone completely remote for their meetings, which, you know, does make it more available for people to attend meetings if you can do it from your own home. The position sort of the school committee has been that our employees, being teachers, are there in person, so we should be there in person. So we try and do that for the majority of our meetings, unless we absolutely need to be remote. But I think that does make it more accessible for people.
I think we've done a pretty good job, and our chair over the last several months has done a good job about setting expectations for length of meetings. Historically, our meetings particularly could go 3 to 4 hours, and if we started at 7, that means we could sometimes end close to 11. That's challenging on a work/school night. So I think letting people know that this is the agenda. Some of the items within the agenda may bleed over, but overall, this meeting is going to be 2.5 hours or maybe 3 hours sometimes. And I think that makes a big difference.
So I guess I would argue, you mentioned the Economic Development Committee having, you know, Friday morning, so I work full time.
Yeah.
And, you know, you'd rather need to be a person who maybe works from home or stays at home, or someone who's retired. So someone who's like me, kind of in the middle, how would, what would be the best way to get involved? Would it be with a committee or a commission or some sort?
I would think an appointed committee for a whole bunch of them. There are housing committees, there are at least 3. If you're interested in affordable housing, I think what some of the others are, they're just probably too many
Councils.
And depending on who's on those committees, you can always ask to have the schedule change. You don't have to meet at 8:30 in the morning. You could meet at another time that is more convenient. We switch even the planning board. We've traditionally met on a Tuesday night, but we had an issue with some of our members, and so we switched to Wednesday. You know, it'll change when we have the next meeting.
All right. Is there anything we haven't covered that you feel a need to say to someone who might be thinking about running for office?
I just wanted to echo what Annette said earlier at the outset, that I think it's very important for people to get involved. People do feel strongly about certain issues and they come and we hear that, but we need people on the other side of these tables because we're a community of volunteers, and that's the way to make this town government work. And it's a constant because we have such a number of boards, 40 or so, that we do constantly need new people to get involved, and that's what will keep our community working better.
I think one of the things that I've found a little bit challenging / frustrating is there are a lot of people with very strong opinions in town, but not a lot of people willing to step up and take a seat on a board where you can have influence over the decisions that are made and things that are happening. And I think talking about balance and the time and the flexibility, the more that people step up and are willing to put in, the more we can distribute, you know, the work and make it more of a viable option for more people that are working and have kids and are taking care of parents or whatever it is. So that would be my last kind of thought. And that, as much as my experience running the first time and having a contested election wasn't my favorite, I'm still here and I would do it again. And I would run for another seat on a different board if I decided not to do, you know, school committee or something. So just, you know.
If you're not involved and you don't participate, you can't complain.
Well, I want to thank the 3 of you so much for being here and sharing your thoughts. And I want to thank Courtney Michael for support at the library, and of course, Mary Antes for everything. And just remind everyone that we're going to have part 2 of this, where we're going to talk about the mechanics of running, how you establish a campaign, what the rules are. We're starting to add materials to the league website, so there'll be like a little library. But anyway, so thank you, everyone.
If you've stayed with this conversation until now, you probably felt it. Local governance is not glamorous, it is not fast, it is not always comfortable. It is meetings that run late, emails that arrive at inconvenient times, conversations that require patience, decisions that affect real neighbors. And yet, every single person you heard today chose to step in anyway. What stood out to me most is this. None of them described themselves as extraordinary. They described themselves as willing. Willing to learn, willing to listen, willing to lose an election and run again, willing to take criticism and still serve. That is civic courage. This season, as we explore bringing more women, more young parents, more diverse families, more working professionals into local leadership, I hope this episode reframes something for you. Governance is not them, it's us. It's the long-term planning that shapes our schools. It's the zoning that shapes our neighborhoods. It's the policies that shape who feels included. And if you care about any of that, you already belong in the conversation. Maybe you don't run this year. Maybe you start by attending a meeting. Maybe you join a committee. Maybe you simply begin paying attention. But participation is how community becomes real. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And if this episode stirred something in you, share it with someone who might need that nudge. This is Women of Wayland, and democracy, especially local democracy, begins right here. I'm Yamini, your host, and I will see you in the next episode, which again will not be hosted by me.